massive bolt and shot, coming in for 9th. And that's the game. Brodie Spurlock is the winner of the Calling Phuket off of an amazing, masterfully played Azalea.
Azalea Ace in the Hole is an obsessive, self-serving contract killer from the depths of the pits. She's carved out a reputation for herself as one of the best contract killers. And if you're looking to pick up Azalea as your hero of choice in this game of flesh and blood, well then you've come to the right place for information. Because I sat down with none other than Brodie Spurlock, the winner of Calling Phuket, to talk about his Blind Azalea Red Line list. Brodie Spurlock, congratulations on winning the Calling this past weekend. You mentioned before we started recording that it was a bit of a whirlwind weekend, and I told you that I was so pumped to see you finally take Azalea across the finish line because you've been playing her for forever. So first of all, congratulations on finally picking it up with Azalea.
Thanks, Steven. Yeah, I've been playing Azalea for pretty much the past year on and off, and I'm really excited to get this Calling win on her. It definitely was a whirlwind weekend, kind of a last-minute trip for me, and I had such a fun time. Just really, really happy.
And the reason you won the Calling is because you were sponsored by MinMax Games. Isn't that right?
That is right. Thank you to MinMax Games for sponsoring me. You can check out MinMax Games for Flesh and Blood singles, sealed product, also articles. They have been churning out some content recently. So make sure to check out MinMax Games. Thank you to them.
And if you would like to win Callings as well, you gotta shop and hang out with MinMax Games. It's proven. It's 100% proven.
That is correct. It's scientifically, we actually did a study that there's an extreme correlation between sandwich consumption and MinMax Games interaction and tournament results.
MinMax Games is your one-stop shop, so check it out at the link below. Let's talk about this deck, and I guess let's start with Azalea herself. And what do you think her strengths are within Flesh and Blood? How do you play into that? And like if a new player is trying to pick this up, or someone that wants to kind of pivot over to the Ranger, what do you think she does in her own unique way that's very powerful?
Azalea has a lot of particular cards that make her strong, but just like from a zoomed out deck perspective, the way she plays, she presents these really, really big attacks with a lot of on hits. So decks that can't block extremely well or can't block a lot often fall victim to her because she stacks up all these on hits on one big arrow, and if you can't stop it, not only is she getting like usually above rate value on the number of the arrow itself, but when you add the on hits to that, the value kind of spirals like crazy when you give your opponent disease tokens, create ponders to reset your own arsenal. So against decks that can't block, she really performs well. And then she also has, of course, the evasive mechanic of Dominate. So in some situations, she's actually very good against decks that do block well if they rely on blocking a lot, because she can make it so that they can only block with one card per turn and really disrupt the way they want to play the game and force it to end faster against these decks that are really trying to drag you out into a long mid-rangey game.
If you're the style of player that likes to be more aggressive and disruptive and kind of push through these terrifying on hits, she's definitely a hero that you could pick up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're looking to pick up a new hero that is more in the disruptive category and someone that can go quite tall at times, she's the one. So from that point forward, where does this style of deck that you've created kind of fall? Talk to us about the philosophy of what you've built here, both in the main board and the sideboard.
Yeah, so I started playing Azalea with the shell that had more blues, normally like roughly 9 blues, played Deadeye, played a couple more of these expensive cards. Back in the day, we played Melting Point as well. And then around the time that all of the ice heroes left the format, I started experimenting with the idea of trying to really cut down on the resources of the deck, because no one was giving you frostbites anymore. So you were a lot more free to just kind of play on whatever resource curve you wanted, and it was never going to be disrupted. And I decided that I really liked this more red line, or you could call it yellow line style, where we play hardly any blues, no one-cost pumps. Everything in the deck is 0 cost except for a few really strong arrows, namely Red and the Ledger.
Right. And
we are mostly just trying to maximize Death Dealer value every turn. So every turn that your Tunic is not on 3, in an ideal world, you're going to be pitching a yellow or a blue to load a 1 cost and play a bunch of pumps and shoot it. And then anytime your Tunic is on 3, you're hoping to use that Tunic counter to activate Death Dealer, load one of your 0 costs, and pump that up and shoot it. So that you're getting the most out of Death Dealer you can every turn and maximizing that Tunic resource every third turn when it comes up. I think that activating Azalea when you don't know what the top card of your deck is one of the most useful tools you have access to in this hero, and is arguably the hardest part of playing the deck, like identifying what those spots are. But there are a lot of situations where the most common one that comes to mind is you start your turn with an arrow in your arsenal. Let's say you drew it off a ponder, and it's just some solid arrow, but you're hoping to Azalea into a pump so that you can clear that arsenal without burning your Snapdragons and activate Death Dealer for the turn. Activating Death Dealer each and every turn is a really good way to, especially when you're starting with the deck, try to figure out what the right line is. If you're not sure and you're kind of overwhelmed by the options, you can let that guide you. Like, what allows me to get the maximum value out of Death Dealer this turn? If you have a Tunic counter, you're ideally using the Tunic counter for it. So you use your cross wrap, you see another arrow on top. It's a fine arrow, you could dominate it, but you would be losing out on the value from Death Dealer. So you bottom that arrow, and in those situations, I will very often just blind Azalea and hope for a pump. Worst case scenario is probably hitting something like Yellow Spire Sniping, which is just like a likely worse arrow with no on hit.
But it's still functional turn, which is, I think, the most important part because of the way that the deck's constructed. You can still fire it if you wanted to with Dominate, with front pumps, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like the vast majority of the time, your turn is going to be staying comparable or getting better. Even if you hit most arrows in your deck, which is not the objective with blinding, your turn's probably getting better because it's now dominated. And if you hit a pump, that was your goal. You get to clear it. Now you get to activate Death Dealer. Yeah, basically that was the number one driving philosophy with this deck. Is just I want to be able to blind Azalea all the time, and I want that to have the best results possible. So I tried to include cards that I was the happiest to see when blinding. Some of the card choices in this deck I have changed over time. Like back at the Realm Rumble in December, I played Scout the Periphery. And since then, I've tested Take Aim and actually like it a lot more. The reload comes up in a lot of situations that you wouldn't think about at first. The most common is just a situation where you want to shoot two arrows in a turn. Maybe you lead with a Bolton shot and it gets blocked out because you've already used Death Dealer and the opponent knows you need that reload. And the Take Aim lets you shoot another arrow without having to burn your bullseye bracers, or maybe if your bracers is gone, it's the only way you're going to be able to.
Yeah.
And then also situations where you don't start your turn with an arsenal. Take Aim lets you reload and get that Skullbone Cross Wrap opt. That can be really helpful just for the utility of having the opt, but especially in situations where you might brick. Azalea is infinitely more likely to hit an all non-attack brick hand when you don't start your turn with an arsenal, so Take Aim helps you get out of those situations. Another spicy card that
I was gonna ask you no matter what, because I have to know about why you choose Amplifying Arrow. To me, it makes a ton of sense, being a zero cost arrow, and the fact that the deck is full of front pumps, that this is just like a free value type card. But go deeper than that. Am I just missing something on this? Because it's a really cool inclusion.
Yeah, so I feel embarrassed that I wrote this card off originally, because after finally testing it and just getting some games with this card, I'm a really big fan of it. The first clarification I want to make, since the text on it can be a little unclear, is that any pump you play will buff up the Amplifying Arrow, regardless of where it is when you play that pump. The reason for that is technically the buff is applied to it when it gets played, and when it gets played, it is face up in a zone. So basically, in a deck where we've cut all the cards that aren't arrows and pumps, besides Codex and Knock, you have more pumps than ever before, and on a lot of turns, you're going to be playing 2 to 3 to maybe even 4 pumps. And all you have to do to make this technically on rate for a yellow card is play 1 pump before it. If you play 2 pumps, it's now a yellow 0 for 4, which is good enough to consider including on its own. And if you play any more than that, it starts to be situationally better than even your red arrows. So I think even if this card was a red, I would actually consider playing it because of how often you're playing 3 or more pumps and it starts being a 0 for 5. But the fact that it's a yellow makes it such a flexible inclusion on turns where you aren't going to be able to pump it up big. You can block with it or pitch it, and it's actually been quite the all-star for me.
Yeah, that's such a cool inclusion, and it's a card that I don't think many people are giving a lot of thought. And so to see it in not just like this type of list, but in a winning list that you put on display at the calling is really, really cool. You talked a little bit about the ratios, and I think we probably want to address the elephant in the room. And look, this is kind of funny. You can literally just sort by pitch. It's a red heavy deck. And the fact that you have the ability to play it as a yellow and buff your yellow count is quite solid. I'm going to change it back because that hurts my eyes to look at. But it's primarily a red heavy deck, and the cost ratio, like you've talked about, is all zeros. Can you go through how many non-attacks we have, or how many overall pumps we have versus arrows within this main board? Because you have a clean 60 here.
Yeah, so the deck is 27 arrows and 27 pumps. And then in addition to that, you have the 3 codex and 3 knock the death whistle. And starting with the arrow ratios, in the past, my number has been roughly 25 for like the bare minimum of arrows I feel comfortable playing, and I've gone to 24 as well. Anything less than that, I start to feel a little uncomfortable. Drawing 4-card hands without an arsenal, it becomes more scary that you're gonna brick on drawing no arrows. For me, those are just the numbers where I've always felt kind of comfortable. 27 in any matchup where you're able to consistently block 3 with any extra arrows you have has felt really clean to me. I feel like I have an arrow in almost every hand, and still not too many, because ideally in Azalea, in a perfect world, you're going to have 1 arrow in every hand and the rest of your cards will be buffs. As long as you're not being forced to block, that's where you want to be, because you want to be able to push your arrow as high as possible. In general, we're really not a blocking deck. We're trying to present the best offense possible, because every additional pump you play is not only adding 3 damage to the attack, but buffing up all of these other on-hits stapled to it and making them all harder to block. And then, yeah, 27 pumps as well, counting the Rain Razors. Shout out to Rain Razors as well, another card that lets us put a resource card in the deck, even though we would probably play this card if it was red. There's so many things that this card can do. It enables some of your widest turns. If you have a couple Bolton shots and or Codex, you can go 3 or 4 arrows wide sometimes, especially using Bullseye Bracers to help with that. And this card being reaction speed also comes up for me a lot, especially against decks that are good at blocking or have a lot of armor. You'll play an arrow with maybe a couple huge on hits. Let's say like even just premeditate in 1 Blood Rot or something. And if this Rain Razors was just another vanilla +3 pump, your opponent would just put another card down and block it.
Sure.
But the fact that it's 2 at reaction speed,
Yeah.
will often get them and end up being 2 plus a Blood Rot plus a Ponder. So it ends up being like 7 instead of 3 in that example. But yeah, big fan of Rain Razors. Codex, of course, is another all-star yellow.
Codex of Frailty is an all-star just in the entire game of Flesh and Blood. For those that don't know, Codex of Frailty, one of the most powerful cards in the game, and does a ton for this deck.
Absolutely. It's often what you use your snaps on in the game. There are situations where I use my snaps because I just get arrow flooded, and so I just have to snaps Bracer something to do anything with my turn. Outside of that, very often Codex is where those Snapdragon Scalers go to be able to use your Death Dealer, so you're not losing out on that value for the turn, and then follow up with this guy. And it is just so good. It is, if you can only do one or the other, you'll usually do Codex.
As far as overall arrows and attacks are concerned, are there any standouts on this list?
I guess we'll start with Red in the Ledger, because this is arguably the strongest card in the deck. When dominated against a deck that likes to take lots of actions, it's so backbreaking sometimes. In the Azalea mirror, this is the strongest thing you can be doing. And if you combine it with one of the 6 hand destruction effects, like Lace with Inertia or Seek and Destroy, that's kind of the go-to power combo of the deck, just dominating a, I call it Inertia Riddle, like Red in the Ledger with Inertia or this Seek and Destroy card. It means your opponent can only do one thing during their turn, and they can't even set up for next turn because they lose all their cards. Really good against decks that you think might be holding on to, let's say, an Art of War or Blood Rush Bellow, one of these go-wide power cards. You just make it so that they can't play that card this turn and they immediately lose it. Another one in this list in particular that I wanted to mention is Endless Arrow. This is a card that didn't used to see as much play in popular Azalea lists, and I think it got stronger with the return of Bullseye Bracers after Lexi LL'd, but I really am a huge fan of this card in general. It kind of in my mind, just has a premeditate stapled to it from the get-go. You can unload your hand instead of saving one pump to Arsenal like you normally might. You just play it out, and if Endless Arrow hits, you're guaranteed going to get to Arsenal for the turn.
I have never considered Endless Arrow to be basically a stapled on premeditate, but that's such a good way to think about it, because in a deck that's predicated off of using some of these equipment like Skullbone Crosswrap with an Arsenal to flip up, and then possibly Azalea and a Dominated Arrow off the back of all those pumps, having just anything in Arsenal like an Endless Arrow is totally fine. It's same thing like premeditates. That's a really good kind of maybe comparison that you can put in your mind if you're picking this up, of looking at Endless Arrow as essentially just an on-hit premeditate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The one that I wanted to bring up as well is Spire Sniping, because I see a lot of players running like Spire Sniping in blue, but as you mentioned, this is a deck that doesn't really need a lot of resources, so instead including it at the yellow, essentially just for the effect. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that went into the ultimate decision to include this card. And I'll start with just the card itself. Like you said, Spire Sniping Blue has been played before. That card will always be close to my heart, mostly because of that. The moment in the finals of that March 2023 brawl you mentioned, Spire Sniping found me the arrow on top for the win. But this card, basically, at yellow, block 3, and is primarily hopefully being used for pitch to load your powerful 1 costs. I struggled for a long time trying to decide between this and yellow Infecting Shot, because the other 12 yellows in the deck are all kind of staples. Like, I wouldn't cut them. Amplifying Arrow is one of the newer ones, but ever since I've played with it, it's a locked 3 of in my mind. And Infecting Shot is the only other arrow in here that has a yellow version that we can include that is a breakpoint. Drill Shot yellow to me is like a little bit questionable, because it attacks for 3 instead of 4, which of course removes the breakpoint from it. But yellow Infecting is something I played with for a long time and kind of used to be in that slot where Amplifying Arrow is. And I ultimately decided on Spire Sniping over it for a couple of reasons. One of the big ones being, anytime you go first, being able to, if you draw this in your hand, it makes it so much more likely you're going to be able to dominate and link a bunch of damage turn 0. Turn 0, like, all you're doing is just trying to give yourself the highest chance to dominate any arrow, because the moment you do, every hand is going to have probably 1 to 2 pumps, and then all of a sudden you're leaking like six or more damage on average. It can be kind of crazy. And then just in general, I kind of decided that if I have this card in my hand and I have to load it, like let's say I have a yellow Bolt and Shot and this is my only 2 arrows, my tunic's not up, I need to load this or yellow Infecting. I think you hit a powerful arrow on top enough of the time, or you just hit any arrow, and dominating is valuable because of the on hits attached to your pumps.
For sure.
But I would rather have this chance of dominating than the Blood Rot.
Looking down in the sideboard, we have 3 copies of Down and Dirty. We've got 3 copies of Fatigue Shot. Ravenous Rabble comes in the sideboard, which I bet a lot of players would look at and think that that's just a main board card, and then Sleep Dart as well. So where are these cards sort of coming in, and at what point are you thinking, let's swap this out for, you know, something like a Down and Dirty?
Yeah, Down and Dirty, we'll just start with that one. It is obviously for both Dromai and Prism. This is my favorite popper, despite being one of the more clunky ones to have in your hand on your own turn, but I find that being able to defend from Arsenal is so key into often both Dromai and Prism. Also, the deck has enough Ponder creation that it's not unlikely in the tournament that you might draw one of these off a Ponder, and then you're happy.
Really good point. Yeah, to just drop it in, and now because it's in the arsenal, you can just throw it out there and use it as a popper. That's a really good point.
Ravenous Rabble is also for the Dromai matchup. This one, it's just good at killing dragons. You normally have a red on top. You can often opt to ensure you'll have a red on top if you're killing something like Mirror Guy. And if you're attacking, let's say, Kyloria, you don't, it doesn't even matter if you hit one of your 3 knocks. But basically just one of the few efficient ways that we can clear dragons without devoting a bunch of damage to them.
What about Fatigue Shot? It's a card that pops up now and again, but not a ton.
Yeah, so this card, for me, is primarily targeted at brutes. KO is very popular. He's been, the most played deck at Pro Tour Los Angeles and the Calling. So this just clean swaps with those Remorselesses, which aren't as strong in the KO matchup. He's often playing 1 or at most maybe 3 cards in a Blood Rush Bellow turn, but it's just not as strong as it is for something like Fi, where they're playing 3 to 4 plus cards every turn. Fatigue Shot is way more consistently 3 or more value, though, because basically all of KO's attacks are 6s. So if this hits them and they want to still have any sort of turn versus you outside of just Mandible Claw, then it's getting more value than pretty much any of your other arrows. Red on the ledger aside, if it's like a big dominated red on the ledger, that still is always going to have the highest ceiling. But this card is just so consistently good versus brutes. It also is great versus guardians. They have these big scary attacks, and Fatigue Shot is a great way to in a situation where you don't have a bunch of Lace with Blood Rots and Premeditates, and you don't have a way to force them to block this turn, you just kind of toss this cheeky guy in the ring, and now it's really hard for them to block a little bit and take some damage to throw back something like a Choke Slam at you.
Fatigue Shot, now known as the cheeky guy. Toss this cheeky guy in there and let it do its thing. Finally, we come to Sleep Dart. It's the last of the 3 ofs in the inventory here. Where are you bringing Sleep Dart in?
Sleep Dart is often really good against heroes that Remorseless is not, I've found. That just happens to be a nice clean swap as well. This is primarily very good against both Illusionists. It's good into Dromai. It stops them from making Ash, turns off their Dragon Army for the turn. Still normally not as powerful as Red in the Ledger versus Dromai, but basically gets to kind of play a pseudo Red in the Ledger role there.
You brought up with Sleep Dart that it's a really easy and clean swap with Remorseless, where if you're bringing in like Ravenous Rabble and Down and Dirty, for example, like for the Dromai matchup, what are you swapping out? Are you running a clean 60 or are you adding to that 60 cards?
Generally running a clean 60. Against Dromai, I will often trim down on the Lace with Frailties, because it's just the worst pump in that matchup.
Sure.
If only Frailty token stopped Ashwings, that would be man.
Nuts. That would be so nuts. That'd be backbreaking for Dromai.
It would be way too good, honestly. But because it doesn't, that card is usually doing like max 1 point of value versus Dromai, and normally not even that. So yeah, we just take out a couple pumps, and then Remorseless is a nice swap with the Sleep Darts, and then
these equipment down here, Spellfray Cloak, we can assume it's for Kano, but do you also bring it in for any other type of matchup?
Nope, just Kano for this one. I used to think that the Kano matchup was not too bad for us, just playing AB2 and a fast deck that could dominate and land a lot of inertia effects.
Yeah.
Recently, I've been struggling into it a little bit more, and I just wanted to shore that matchup up. And I think that having it's even better than having like a guaranteed Tunic counter. Like I was thinking that Tunic just doesn't always get to 3, and this kind of like guarantees that it gets there, but it's significantly more than that. In a lot of situations against Kano, you're going to attack with a big arrow and hold 1 yellow card in your hand, so you're going to be able to activate your 2 AB anyway. So being able to push that up to 3, and also making the Kano opponent aware that you can push it to 3, just makes their life harder, makes it significantly less likely, I believe, that you're going to die to a combo.
It's a great blocking card. Are you ever using it for anything else than just blocking 2?
So this is a fun yes and no answer. I will say no, I'm never sideboarding it into a matchup with the intention to do anything other than block. But with that said, I've actually way more times than I would have expected once this card is sideboarded in, I've activated the ability to pretty cool effect. You can do some fun Endless Arrow turns and just other like Rain Razor shenanigans where it did happen more when the deck had more blues. Now it's harder to make these lines realistic.
Yeah.
But if you draw your knock, you Death Dealer your Drill Shot, activate Perch Grapplers, attack with it, then fire off your Rain Razors, then, whatever, Bullseye Bracers, an Amplifying Arrow. Amplifying Arrow comes in for 7 now. It has Go Again because Perch Grapplers is crazy. You Codex, get an Endless Arrow, turn the Endless Arrow face up with Cross Wrap, do an Opt, shoot it. It has Go Again because of Perch Grapplers. You probably don't have a way to reload at this point, but
no, probably not.
There's some fun ceiling on this card.
But if you pull that off, you've lived in magical Christmas land for a turn, and that right there is the dream we all strive to enjoy. living in magical Christmas land with Azalea. All right, let's do this, my friend. Walk me through your thought process. We drew a random hand. I'm currently inactive, so I could lose the game on the spot, but hopefully we won't. Tell me what you do here.
So we're going to assume we're going first with this hand. Our Tunic just ticked a 1. And going first, we basically want to just prioritize finding a dominated arrow at all costs. Okay. So I would be playing Take Aim here, loading either one of the 2 arrows, keeping the pump. So definitely play Take Aim. And then I think this might depend on the matchup. It's like which one, if I end up keeping one of these, which one am I more likely to want to arsenal? And I think the answer depends versus something like a warrior, and anything with like some 2 tempers or 2 battle warns, I'd probably lean drill shot, but depends on the matchup. Let's just say we load endless arrow, keep drill shot.
Sounds good.
And then go ahead and opt with that cross wrap, take a peek at the top.
Lace.
And because it's not an arrow, we're just going to ship it to the bottom, activate Azalea blind, hope we hit a dominate. Not a dominate.
Curses.
So, a bit sad. At this point, this is actually a cool situation to have come up, because the only thing we have to think about at this point is how we want to filter our next hand. We want to go ahead and just get that release out of there because it's face up.
Okay.
And ideally have a face down arsenal at the start of each of our turns. And
sure.
The way I like to think about filtering from this point, we have our pump that we want to arsenal. In general, we want to try to always be arsenaling a card with Go Again, so we can clear it out and activate Death Dealer. And so the only decision to make is whether we want this drill shot in our hand or not. And I would say because our Tunic is not going to be on 3, the ideal next turn involves pitching a resource card to load a 1 cost to maximize Death Dealer. And because drill shot is neither of those things, I would just pitch it to Death Dealer and get it out of here.
I was going to say, are you considering just the pitch Death Dealer, no load, and then arsenal this? Because some people may go, okay, well, this is a time to actually use these 2 front pumps with Bullseye, but that was my first thought and leaves you with an arsenal. So you're not expending this on something like a turn 1?
You could, depending on the matchup, you could just load the drill shot and shoot it for 10. I think in a matchup like I or Azalea or like something with a bunch of 2 blocks, you could consider that. But if the deck is reasonably likely to be able to block 10, I prefer not doing that because you don't know for sure what the card is that you're going to draw off the top. And there's some value in guaranteeing that you can arsenal a pump as opposed to an arrow. So in most matchups, I would lean toward just pass the turn and set that Lace with Frailty up for next turn.
For sure. Sounds good. Let's do it. And then after they do all their things, we have the opportunity to probably start our turn with Skullbone, yeah?
Absolutely, yep.
So we Skullbone, we find Knock on top. So a couple of non-arrows that we've found thus far. What's your play when you find a Knock in this scenario?
So the first thing I'll say is, in theory, we could be playing a matchup where our opponent is like quote-unquote degen fatiguing us. If we're playing against like a Rampart Guardian or something, then I would probably keep this Knock and go fetch a drill shot or something. But in any normal race matchup, I would just put this to the bottom. We don't have any clean way to fetch red in the ledger. We don't have inertia effects. So there's not really a backbreaking Knock target we can get. And then I would just load that drill shot, pitching the Remorseless, and hope that next card is a pump.
Okay, so we're going to Lace with Frailty, and then Death Dealer, pitching Remorseless, loading Drill Shot, and then we draw Rain Razors.
That's perfect. So in this case, I think it makes sense to just jam the Take Aim, jam the Drill Shot, attack our opponent for 10, and then at this point, once we send in the arrow for 10, there are, I guess, a couple considerations. If they were to block 10, and they have a desirable armor piece we want to hit, then maybe we would jam this Rain Razors out at reaction speed to kind of snipe that, and especially if the Frailty matters, there's also Frailty on this. In general, though, we're likely just going to arsenal this Rain Razors.
Cool, so let's play like we're playing towards the arsenal, because I like the idea that you're presenting of the point of the deck being that we're arsenaling a pump and being able to activate Skullbone every turn, kind of like what you would normally do with Azalea in general, but playing towards that sort of game plan is what you talked about the deck is kind of aiming to do, right?
Yeah, 100%. You want to try to activate Skullbone every turn, try to maximize the value from Death Dealer every turn. This hand is actually fantastic.
It's full block, right?
We love 10 on the
That's the play. The Frailty Tusk.
The Frailty Tusk. Honestly, it actually is it is not too different from some of the attacks warriors will send in this meta. In the calling, a couple of times gave a Hatchet Dorinthia Frailty, and they started their turn off with a modest 1. I would say if we're actually getting attacked with a Tusk for 1, yes. Otherwise, I think it makes sense to block with the red in the ledger because we have our Tunic going to 3, so we're going to be able to load that Bolt and Shot off of Tunic, and we are then going to follow that up with the Codex, and the red in the ledger just doesn't quite fit into the curve. You could pitch it to Death Dealer, but I think it makes sense to block if you can get the full 3 out of it.
Makes sense. All right, so say we get our value out of blocking with a card. And then we move on over to our turn. How are you playing this? We'll continue to start with Skullbone?
Yep.
All right,
so we see a pump on top.
We see a pump.
Yeah, we just keep that on top, and then turn is looking great here. We're going to get our... we will just fire off that Rain Razors, and hopefully this is going to be for 4 or more this turn. I don't believe we have an Endless Arrow, so probably just exactly 4.
And this is where we Tunic into our Death Dealer, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Gonna load Bolt and Shot, and that's gonna give us Seek and Destroy, which gives us access to playing it, yeah?
Yeah, and so this is another interesting spot that probably comes down to the matchup and state of the game, but the game kind of just began. So there are 2, I guess, different arguments you could make for when to play your pumps here. The first is you could just jam both of them on the Bolt and Shot to try to hide the fact that you have a Codex. If I was playing against something like a Brute with a Scowling Flesh Bag, I would definitely just play both 0 for 3s here so that they don't know if I have a Codex in hand and they don't intimidate me. But if I'm playing against a hero where I think the inertia on hit is more likely to matter, and them having the information that I'm holding onto Codex isn't really going to help them block that much better, then I would probably just play 1 pump on the Bolt and Shot and another on the next arrow to make it more likely inertia connects. Let's say that I think it's more likely in general that I would lean toward that. It also, doing that can also kind of bait your opponent into blocking the Bolt and Shot. When you present 9 and you have 2 cards sitting in hand, if you don't have a Codex or a take aim, your opponent is thinking, well, you've already used Death Dealer to shoot me with another arrow. You would have to have one of those cards or use your Bullseye, so maybe this reload matters. Maybe they then kind of get baited into blocking a Bolt and Shot that doesn't actually matter much.
Right.
So in most matchups, I would lean toward just jamming Seek and Destroy and Bolt and Shot here.
Cool, let's do that. So Seek and Destroy, Bolt and Shot. This goes for 9 go again. Let's assume that we're good to go on hits. Are you reloading at this point? Doesn't seem like it matters.
It should be irrelevant here.
Cool.
You can reload, but you don't need to.
And then from here, we're laced with inertia playing Codex of Frailty?
Yep, absolutely.
So then we have the secondary on hit effect. If they were, let's just assume they were somehow to block out that that first attack, we can now Codex of Frailty, and then of course we're probably grabbing either Drill Shot or Bolt and Shot because we don't have the resources for one of the 1 costs. So which one do you pick here?
In this case, the go again on Bolt and Shot doesn't matter, so just snatch the Drill.
Sounds good. And then we fire that for a casual 9, making an 18 damage turn, and we're giving our opponent a Frailty, and we get a card in Arsenal. That seems okay.
Yeah, so we basically did a 4-card... I guess if you count the fact that we started with an Arsenal and ended with an Arsenal, we really only spent 3 cards in Tunic. And we got 18 off of that. Normally off of that, like from pure Flesh and Blood rate perspective, you should be getting 11. Yep. So our turn went like +7, not counting the Frailty or the inertia or the Drill Shot effect.
And those are the big ones. I think it's easy to, well, I shouldn't say it's easy. It is common to run the numbers, right? And be like, well, this is the value that we get. But implied value from something like inertia or like a Seek and Destroy effect and the Frailty on top of that can be so much bigger and better into specific matchups or just in general, that especially with depending on their hand composition, the texture of what they're presenting, that what we're really doing on that turn is so absurdly above rate that kind of shows the power level of something like a Codex of Frailty, doesn't it?
It's blinding in general. It definitely feels a little bit scary to think about. Like you're just subjecting yourself to any random card in your deck. But yeah, I think of it as a tool. It very often, when you think through all the possibilities of what you could hit, very often is like, there's like 1 or 2 cards in the deck that make your turn a little bit worse, and most things like about half the deck makes your turn about the same, and about half makes it better. So it's actually like just kind of pure upside. I do think if you're playing against an illusionist and you have something like Down and Dirty's sideboarded in, then it becomes much more of a risk, and you really have to consider whether you're willing to risk hitting that complete brick. That is quite scary. But for any matchup where you're just playing the normal 60 plus or minus a few tech arrows, it's quite safe. I'll do it. The start of the turn off the cross wrap that we talked about in the deck tech is like the #1 time that it comes up, but we also just talked about it a minute ago. But there's also spots where you just use it to quote unquote like try to greed a little bit more value out of your turn. Like, but if you think about all the possibilities for a second, blinding actually opens you up to a vast majority of desirable situations.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the interesting part about the whole thing, because like range analysis dictates that if more of these possibilities are, and perhaps a significant amount more are good for us, then we probably should go down that route if we're playing like based on range analysis and percentage plays. And I feel like there's like a wall between tier 1 and tier 2, and tier 1 is this is a random moment and randomness could make me lose, and so I'm going to play to the thing that is guaranteed damage. And tier 2 is this is something that could make me deal even more damage and eventually lead me to winning the game, especially in Flesh and Blood. And so getting past that wall that separates tier 1 and tier 2 of the RNG is the really interesting part. And you've done it to a T. And not only that, but we've also killed our opponent. They're at 959. Congratulations to us. We did it in 4 turns. They're dead, and we have a double arsenal. So if we were playing Lexi, we could do it again, but instead, we've killed our opponent. So congratulations to us, I guess.
Woohoo, we did it. Also,
yes.
Just tiny parting tidbit with these 2 cards here. I would, in a vacuum, if I have to arsenal 1 card without knowing anything else in my hand, I would prefer red or yellow Bolt and Shot over any average pump. But in this case, because we have extra information about what's going to be in our hand, I would arsenal the take aim. I'd rather keep Bolton in hand because it is yellow.
Okay, let's see. What would be the biggest, like, using range analysis, what would be the biggest benefit for arsenaling this that we draw after that? Or is the knowledge already known, just the fact that we have Bolt and Shot as a backup?
I guess the #1 like example of a hand where you'd get paid off for that choice is if you draw like 2 more pumps and a 1-cost arrow, then now you have this yellow with which you can Death Dealer the 1-cost and shoot it, whereas the other decision would leave you with a hand of all reds.
Okay, I'm going to make you the smartest man alive. Are you ready? Arsenal take aim. Dang it, we were so close.
This is a pretty good hand too.
This is a pretty good hand. Yeah, it's not bad, but you know what? That's we could have gotten there at the end. Well, my friend, I appreciate you hopping on and walking us through, and hopefully people enjoy getting the insider knowledge about how you managed to think through this fun puzzle of a deck.
Yeah, it's such a fun deck. Thanks for having me on. I hope people found it helpful. It was a fun time.
All right, block Tunic and Skullbone. This is definitely the one.
on the Tusk for 1.
The Tusk for 1, you got to block it.